The horse came in from the west, and Clara Whitmore almost didn't see it. She was elbow-deep in the wash bucket, scrubbing a pair of her late husband's work trousers she still hadn't gotten around to throwing out, when the movement caught her eye through the gap in the fence posts. Just a shape at first, dark against the dying orange of the sky, moving slow, too slow for a rider trying to get somewhere before dark. She straightened up and wiped her hands on her apron. Watched. The animal was a bay, and even from this distance she could tell something was wrong with it. Its head hung too low. Its gait was all wrong, stumbling rather than walking, like something broken trying to remember how legs worked. And the man on its back, he wasn't sitting straight. He was folded over the saddle horn, his whole body curled inward like he was protecting something underneath him. Clara didn't move for a moment. Didn't call out to anyone because there was no one to call. It was just her on this land now, her and the two hired hands who'd already ridden out for the week. She'd been alone before. She knew the particular weight of it. She walked toward the fence. The horse made it another 30 yards before it simply stopped. Not spooked, not startled. It stopped the way exhausted things stop, with a kind of awful finality, legs shaking beneath it, head dropping almost to the grass. And then, slowly, it folded. First the front legs, then the back. It went down onto its side in the dust just past the gate, and the man on its back slid with it, rolled onto the ground, and lay still. Clara was already running. She got to him in seconds and dropped to her knees. He was face down in the dirt, which was how she saw his back first. The shirt torn in two places. The dark crusted stain across his left shoulder that she recognized immediately as dried blood. Old wound, maybe a day, maybe two. His face, when she rolled him, was burned raw across the nose and cheeks, lips cracked and split, eyes closed. "Hey!" She grabbed his shoulder, shook him. "Hey, mister!" That's when she heard it, a sound so small and strange against the prairie silence that she thought she'd imagined it. A thin, wavering cry. Not a man's sound at all. She looked down at his chest. His arms were still locked around something wrapped in his coat. He'd tied it there, she realized. He'd used a length of rope looped over his shoulders to bind his arms around the bundle against his chest, so that even if he lost consciousness, he wouldn't drop it. It was the most desperate, heartbreaking thing she'd ever seen in her life. What in the... She worked at the knot with numb fingers. Come on, come on! The rope gave. She pulled back the coat. Two faces looked up at her. Or didn't look. They were too small for that, too new to the world to be doing anything much beyond existing. Twin girls. Infant twins, maybe 3 months old, if she had to guess, wrapped together in what had once been a woman's shawl. Yellow wool with blue edging, the kind of thing you'd make yourself through a long winter. They were damp with sweat, flushed from the heat, and both of them were crying now, that thin, desperate newborn cry that sounds less like anger than like a question. Where did everything go? Why is it like this now? Clara looked from the babies to the man. His chest was moving, barely, but it was moving. Okay, she said to nobody in particular. She said it the way you say things when you're buying yourself time to think. Okay. She couldn't carry all 3 of them at once. That was simply a fact. She took the babies first, held them against her own chest as best she could, and got them to the porch before going back for the man. He was bigger than he looked. All of them were when they were dead weight. And getting him off the ground took 2 tries and a string of words she wouldn't have said in polite company. She got him to the porch steps, then up the porch steps one at a time, his boots scraping across the wood and through the front door. She laid him on the sitting room floor because the floor was closer than the bedroom, and she wasn't sure she had enough left in her arms to make the distance. He groaned when she set him down. Good, she said. That means you're alive. She went to the kitchen, filled a basin with water, pulled every clean rag she could find, and came back. The babies she'd set in the old laundry basket, which wasn't ideal, but it had high sides and they were too small to roll, so it would do. She checked them first. They were hungry. Desperately, furiously hungry, screaming at the absolute injustice of it. But she couldn't feed them yet, not without knowing what they'd been drinking, what they could handle. She found a tin cup and mixed water with a small amount of canned milk, tested the temperature on her wrist, and spent 20 minutes getting enough into each of them to quiet the worst of it. They didn't settle, exactly, but the screaming dropped to a low, exhausted complaint, and that was something. Then she turned to the man. His name she didn't know yet. She'd find it out later, rifled through his coat pocket. A crumpled folded piece of paper with Silas Boone written on the outside in someone else's handwriting. A note he'd been carrying for someone else, maybe. Or maybe his own name written down by someone who'd wanted to make sure it survived if he didn't. She cleaned the shoulder wound, which was worse than she'd thought. Not a bullet, but some kind of gash, maybe from a fall, maybe from something else. Packed it with clean cloth and tied it tight. She got water into him a little at a time using a cloth she squeezed against his lips. She peeled off his boots, which were falling apart at the soles, and saw blisters across both feet where the leather had given out miles ago. His hands were the worst. The palms were rubbed nearly through from something. Reins, she thought. He'd gripped the reins hard enough, long enough, to wear his own skin away. He woke near midnight. Not all at once. First just the eyes, cracked open and staring at the ceiling like he didn't know what a ceiling was. Then his hands moved, reached, searching, grasping at nothing, and she saw the panic start to climb across his face. "The babies," she said. She said it quick before the panic could take hold. "They're here. They're safe. They're right over there." He turned his head. The basket was 3 feet away. Both girls were sleeping now, finally, their small chests rising and falling, their fists curled against their cheeks. He looked at them for a long time. His throat moved. "They took some milk," Clara said. "They're not well fed. I'll need to get to town for proper supplies, but tonight they're all right. You kept them alive." He didn't say anything for another minute. His breathing was slow and deliberate, like every breath was a decision he had to make on purpose. "You own this place?" he finally said. His voice came out in pieces, rough and dry and broken up. "I do." "Husband?" "Dead 2 winters ago." He seemed to take that in. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "I remembered someone told me once there was a woman out here, a widow, that she was decent." Clara looked at him. "You rode 30 miles on that information?" "Closer to 34. A pause. "I wasn't thinking too clearly." "I noticed." He almost made a sound that might have been a laugh. It died before it got there. "Who are they?" Clara asked. She kept her voice level. He closed his eyes. She watched his face shift, whatever he was holding down moving just beneath the surface. "Found them 4 days ago," he said. "River crossing about 20 miles east of the Platte. There was a wagon train, 8 wagons." He stopped. "And?" "Everyone was dead." He said it flat. Flat the way you say things when you've said them to yourself enough times that they've worn smooth. "I'd come up on the rear. I smelled the smoke first, thought maybe they were camped. But it wasn't camp smoke." Another pause. "The last wagon, I was checking for survivors. The mother was... She'd gotten the girls under the floorboards, hidden them. She was lying on top of the hatch. She'd been that way long enough that I almost didn't check." Clara was very still. "She was gone by the time I found her," he said. "But the girls weren't. She'd kept them quiet somehow, long enough." He opened his eyes and looked at the basket again. "I didn't know what to do with them. I couldn't leave them. I thought about riding to the nearest town, but I..." He stopped again, and this time the stillness in his face broke for just a second, something raw and shaken moving through it. There were tracks. Recent ones. Whoever did it, they'd come back. Looking, checking the bodies. "I thought if I took the main road, someone might..." "So you went cross-country?" "I went cross-country." Clara breathed out slowly through her nose. She looked at the basket, looked at him. "Who are they?" she asked again. "Do you know their family?" "I found a Bible in the wagon. Family name was Calloway. From Ohio, looked like. The father's name, the mother's. But I didn't..." He shifted, winced sharply. "I didn't look close. I was trying to get out of there." "You did right," she said. He looked at her like he wasn't sure he believed that. "Sleep," she said. "There's time to figure the rest of it out. They're safe tonight, and so are you. That's enough for right now." He didn't argue. She wasn't sure he had enough left in him to argue with anything. His eyes closed, and within 2 minutes his breathing had evened out into something deeper and less ragged. Clara sat on the floor beside the basket for a while. She wasn't sure how long. Outside, the prairie was quiet the way it got after midnight. Not peaceful, exactly, but emptied out. The wind gone still, and the coyotes finished with their noise. She listened to the twins breathe. She listened to the man. Silas Boone, crumpled piece of paper said, "Breathe." She thought about a woman she'd never met hiding her daughters under a wagon floor and lying down on top of them and refusing to move even when it cost her everything. She thought about what it would take to do that. She thought she might understand it, maybe. Not fully, but some. He slept for 18 hours. Clara didn't. She managed 3 or 4 in pieces, snatched in the chair beside the basket while the twins slept between feedings. She'd ridden into town at first light, 6 miles there and back before 9, and returned with canned milk, clean cloth, a bottle with a soft rubber teat she'd had to talk old Mercer at the general store into parting with. She told him she had infant relatives visiting and that she needed supplies urgently, and she'd said it in the tone that meant she wasn't explaining further, and Mercer had, to his credit, simply sold her what she needed without asking anything else. By the time she got back, both girls were awake and furious about it. She learned to tell them apart that first morning, though barely. The one on the left had a faint birthmark behind her left ear, a small, pale crescent, easy to miss. That one seemed to wake up angry and calm down slowly. The other one woke calm and could escalate to screaming in under 10 seconds with no warning at all. 2 different personalities already, at what Clara guessed was somewhere between 10 and 12 weeks old. It struck her as remarkable that they'd each managed to already become themselves. She named them, provisionally, in her head, just so she could tell them apart when she was tired. Rose for the one with the birthmark, Wren for the other one. She told herself the names didn't mean anything. She was wrong about that, but she didn't know it yet. She was on her second round of feeding, sitting on the porch in the afternoon light with a baby on each knee because she'd found that holding them both at once was easier than listening to one scream while she fed the other, when the screen door opened and Silas Boone walked out. He walked carefully, like a man taking inventory of all his parts and finding the count uncertain. He'd found the basin of water she'd left and the fresh shirt she'd draped over the chair. It had been her husband's, too big for most men, but this man was close enough to the same size that it would work. And he'd done what he could to make himself presentable, which wasn't a lot, but was something. He looked at her on the porch, looked at the babies, looked at her again. "You need to sit down before you fall down," she said. "There's a chair." He sat in the chair she'd indicated, the one on the left, and put his bandaged hands on his knees. He looked out across the flat land for a while without saying anything. The afternoon light was doing the thing it did this time of year, going all gold and sideways, catching the tops of the grass so the whole prairie looked like it was quietly burning. "Thank you," he said eventually. "You can do something useful to repay me when you're able to stand up straight. Until then, don't thank me." He looked at her sidelong. "You always like this?" "Like what?" "Practical. Is that a complaint?" "No," he said. "It's not." Wren had finished her bottle and was now regarding Silas with the blank, slightly alarmed expression that infants have when they notice new faces, as if the existence of additional people in the world is both interesting and deeply suspicious. He looked back at her. "She doesn't blink much," he said. "She does it to unsettle people. I've noticed." Clara shifted the baby to her shoulder and began the careful process of coaxing a burp. "What's your plan? Once you're on your feet—" He was quiet a moment. "I need to get to the sheriff. What I found out there, they'll need to know. Document it." He paused. "And someone needs to know about the girls. Find out if there's family." "You think there's family?" "There's always family. Whether they'll want them is another question." Clara said nothing to that. "And you?" he said. "What about me? What do you do with them in the meantime?" She looked down at Rose, who had fallen asleep against her arm with the particular boneless commitment to unconsciousness that small babies have. She looked at Wren, who was still watching Silas like he might do something worth reporting. "In the meantime," Clara said, "I keep them alive." It was exactly as simple and as complicated as that. The sheriff came on the 3rd day. Clara had sent word with the boy who brought her weekly supplies, and Nathan Hale rode out that afternoon, a broad man in his 50s, with a face that had weathered badly and a manner that was slow and careful and generally harder to read than it looked. He talked to Silas for a long time. Clara stayed on the other side of the house and listened to the rise and fall of voices without making out the words. She heard Silas describe what he'd found at the river crossing. She could tell from the pauses where the harder parts of it were. And she heard the sheriff asking questions in his slow way. She heard names she didn't know. She heard the word tracks several times. When Nathan finally came to find her, he stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands and looked at the twins for a long moment before he said anything. "You know anything about the Calloway family?" he asked. "Only what he told me. Ohio family, headed west to settle." He turned the hat in his hands. "Husband's people are from back east. Wife had a sister in Kansas somewhere. I'll send word. It'll take time to find anyone." "How much time?" He shrugged. It was the honest kind of shrug, not the evasive kind. "Weeks. Could be more. These things are—" He stopped. "The relevant question is what happens to these girls in the meantime, and it seems like you've already answered that." It seemed like the obvious answer. He nodded slowly. He looked at Wren, who was in the basket awake and making a series of small sounds to herself, a private monologue that seemed to be going somewhere important. He looked at Rose, asleep under a light cloth. "I'll file the paperwork," he said. "Temporary arrangement. Legal. Just until we locate family." "That's all I'm asking," Clara said. He nodded again, looked at her with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite admiration, but was somewhere in that general direction. "You sure about this?" "I was sure before I was sure," she said, which made no sense, and also made complete sense, and Nathan Hale seemed to understand it because he put his hat back on and said he'd be in touch. The nights were the worst of it, not because they were frightening, exactly, but because they were long and relentless, and the twins operated on a schedule that had nothing to do with human notions of when sleep was appropriate. Claire would get them down around 10, and Wren would be up at midnight, and Rose at 2, and then both of them together at 4, screaming at some private injustice she was never able to identify. She learned to move through the house in the dark without a lamp. She learned the exact amount of pressure required to soothe each of them. Rose wanted her back patted in a slow, steady rhythm. Wren, counterintuitively, wanted to be held very still, arms pinned to her sides, while someone talked to her in a low, even voice, talking about what didn't matter. It was just the voice she wanted. Silas started getting up for the 4 o'clock feeding on the 5th day. He didn't ask. He just appeared in the doorway in the middle of the night when both of them were screaming, took Wren from the basket, and stood there holding her the way Clara had described, arms still, voice low, telling her about the time his horse had gotten stuck in a creek bed, and the two of them had spent an entire afternoon working out a solution that had ended up involving a fence post and a great deal of creative profanity. The baby stared at him. He kept talking. Clara fed Rose and watched them from across the room. "She stopped crying," she said. "I noticed." "What are you saying to her?" "Exactly what I said. The horse and the creek bed." "And that works?" "Apparently she finds it soothing." He looked down at Wren, who had now closed her eyes. "Either that or she's putting herself to sleep out of spite." "It might be the spite," Clara agreed. They stayed up together until 5, both of them sitting on the kitchen floor with their backs against the cabinets because neither of them had the energy to make it to an actual chair. The lamps were low. Outside, something was moving in the grass. Could have been a deer, could have been wind, could have been nothing. "You have family?" Clara asked. She hadn't meant to ask. It just came out of the silence. "Not any that are in the habit of writing," he said. "What does that mean?" "It means they exist, but we've come to an understanding about distance." She looked at him sideways. "You're from where originally?" "Missouri. Long time ago." He paused. "You?" "Kansas. My husband's family was from here. We came out after the wedding." "You like it?" She thought about it. "I didn't at first. It's a hard place to like. Too flat. Too loud in the wind and too quiet when it stops." She looked at her hands. "I've been here 7 years. I think I like it now. Or I've grown into it. I'm not always sure those are different things." Silas nodded like he understood that. "You gonna stay?" she asked. "When you're well enough to ride out." "Are you going to?" He looked at the basket. At Rose's fist curled against the edge of the laundry basket, which was already too small for both of them, but still working, at Wren's eyelashes. I don't know, he said. It was an honest answer. She respected honest answers more than comfortable ones. She fell asleep against the cabinet sometime around 5:30. She woke up at 6:30 with a blanket over her shoulders that hadn't been there before, and both twins still sleeping, and the smell of coffee from the stove. She sat up slowly, worked the knot out of her neck, and looked around. Silas was at the window, a cup of coffee in his bandaged hands, looking out at the morning coming up over the eastern grass. He looked less like a dead man today. He still looked like a man who'd been through something that had rearranged him. You didn't come back from what he'd described at the river crossing without carrying some of it permanently, but there was something steadier in how he stood, something that had settled. Coffee's on, he said, without turning. I can see that. You should eat something. You're lecturing me about eating. I'm not lecturing, I'm observing. She stood up, Bones complaining about the floor, and went to pour herself a cup. They stood at opposite ends of the kitchen while the morning light came in through the window, and the twins slept on in their too small basket, and outside the Nebraska prairie unrolled itself in every direction, indifferent and enormous and entirely unconcerned with the small, fragile, improbable household that had assembled itself here over the past 5 days. Clara thought about the woman who had hidden her daughters under a wagon floor. She thought about what it meant to choose something so completely that it cost you everything. She wasn't sure she understood it fully. Not yet, but she thought she might be starting to. The blanket was still on her shoulders when Clara found the second note. She hadn't been looking for anything. She'd gone through Silas's coat again, the one he'd used to wrap the twins, because she needed to wash it, and she wanted to make sure she hadn't missed anything in her pockets before she put it in the water. The first note, the one with his name on it, she'd already set aside, but tucked deeper, in the inner pocket that had been sewn shut, and then carefully reopened with a knife at some point, was a folded square of paper wrapped in a piece of oilcloth. She almost didn't open it. It wasn't her business. She opened it. It was a letter, handwritten in a woman's script, small and careful, the kind of handwriting that had been learned from a good teacher and practiced until it became second nature. The date at the top was 11 days ago. The salutation read, "To whoever finds my daughters." Clara sat down on the kitchen floor and read it twice. The mother's name had been June Calloway. She'd written the letter at the river crossing in what she described as her last good hour, while her husband and the other men were still able to keep watch. She'd known by then that the watch wouldn't hold. She described the men who'd attacked them, how many, which direction they'd come from. The brands on 2 of the horses she'd recognized as belonging to an outfit she didn't name, only described. She described hiding the twins. She described what she wanted for them, if they survived. Not grand things, just ordinary ones. She wanted them to know each other. She wanted them to have enough to eat. She wanted, if it wasn't too much to ask of the world, for someone to be kind to them. The letter ended with both girls' names, Eleanor and May. Clara sat on the kitchen floor for a while with the letter in her hands. The twins were in the basket in the sitting room. She could hear the small sounds they made, that constant low-level audio of babies just existing, breathing and shifting and occasionally voicing some internal complaint to no one in particular. Eleanor. May. She'd been calling them Rose and Wren for 5 days. The private name she'd told herself didn't mean anything. She folded the letter back into the oilcloth and set it carefully on the table. She would give it to Nathan Hale. It was evidence, and it was a legal document of sorts, and it contained descriptions of the men who'd done it that the law would need. She understood all of that clearly. She also understood sitting there on the kitchen floor that June Calloway had written that letter while hiding her daughters under a wagon floor, while men with guns were somewhere outside, and she had used the time she had left to ask the world to be kind to her girls. And the world, in its usual uneven and accidental fashion, had delivered that letter to a ranch widow in Nebraska who was already failing to keep her heart at a professional distance from 2 infants she'd only known for less than a week. She heard Silas's boots on the porch steps. He came in through the back door, which she'd left open for the morning air, and he was moving better today, less like a man cataloging his own damage and more like one who'd accepted the damage and was working around it. The shoulder still made him careful on the left side. But he'd been out to the barn. She could tell by the smell of hay and the way he was brushing his hands off on his thighs. He saw her face. "What happened?" he said. She handed him the letter. He read it standing up. She watched him read it, watched the way his jaw tightened about halfway through and didn't loosen again until he'd finished and folded it closed. He set it on the table next to where she'd put it. June, he said, like he was trying the name on, seeing how it fit against what he'd seen at the river crossing. Their names are Eleanor and May. Something crossed his face, quick and complicated. I didn't look close enough, he said, at the Bible. I should have. You were trying to get out alive with 2 infants. You looked close enough. He looked at the oilcloth. She knew I was coming? She wrote it for whoever found them. It could have been anyone. But it was me. It was you, Clara said. He was quiet for a long time. He picked up his coffee cup from where he'd set it down and held it with both hands even though it was empty. Just something to do with his fingers. Outside, the morning was going on without them. Birds in the yard, a light wind moving through the grass, the ordinary business of a Nebraska summer day completely indifferent to the weight of what was sitting on the kitchen table. Nathan needs to see it, Silas said finally. I know. I'll send word today. He nodded. He looked toward the sitting room where they could both hear May. She was May now, even if Clara wasn't ready to say it out loud, going through her usual morning monologue. He set the cup down. I'm going to fix the fence on the east side, he said. I noticed 2 posts yesterday that'll be down by winter if they don't get looked at. Clara looked at him. You can't use that shoulder for heavy work. I'm not going to use the shoulder. I'm going to use the other one and be annoying about it. She almost smiled. Almost. There are tools in the barn. Left side, second shelf. He nodded and went back out the door, and Clara sat at the kitchen table and listened to him cross the yard, and then she got up and went to the sitting room to pick up May, who had escalated from monologue to editorial and was making her displeasure with the general situation very clear. Eleanor, she said quietly to the sleeping one. The name fit. She hated that it fit. Fine. Nathan Hale came the following morning, and he brought a deputy Clara didn't recognize. Young, nervous-looking, with the air of someone who was still deciding whether the job was going to suit him. He read the letter at the kitchen table while Silas stood by the window and Clara sat across from him. When he finished, he set it down with the particular deliberateness of a man who needed a moment before he could speak. She described the horses, he said. I saw that, Silas said. The brand she's describing us double bar R, notched on the left. I've seen that before. Nathan's voice was careful. Too careful. The kind of careful that meant he was thinking about how much to say. There's an outfit operating north of the Platte, runs men through the territory moving cattle. Legitimate business on paper. Some of the men they hire are not what I'd call legitimate. You know who's running it, Silas said. It wasn't a question. I have a name I'm looking into. That's not an answer. Nathan looked at him steadily. It's the answer I've got right now, Boone. These things take time. You go riding in with accusations and no evidence, you'll spook them and we'll lose the trail entirely. Silas looked like he didn't love that, but he also looked like a man who understood the logic even when he hated it. He turned back to the window. What do I do with what I saw? He said. You write it down. Everything. Every detail, every direction, every man you saw or heard. The deputy here will take your statement today, and we'll build from there. The young deputy pulled out a notebook and looked between them like he wasn't sure if he should be writing yet. What about the girls? Claire said. Nathan looked at her. I've sent word east, the Calloway family, the husband's side. There's a cousin in Ohio, from what I can find. Haven't heard back. Wife's sister in Kansas. I'm still trying to locate. He paused. It takes time, Clara. I understand that. She kept her voice even. And while it takes time, they're in your care. Officially. I filed the paperwork 3 days ago. He looked at her carefully. Is that going to be a problem? No, she said. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded. He looked at the basket near the window, at Eleanor and May doing what they did, just existing, vigorously and without apology, and his face did something complicated. They look healthy, he said. They're getting there, Clara said. Silas spent 2 hours with the deputy that afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table while Clara kept the twins in the other room. She could hear his voice through the wall, measured, precise, going through it all in order. He had a good memory. She'd noticed that about him. He remembered details the way some people couldn't help remembering them, like they were burned in. When the deputy left, Silas sat at the table for a while without moving. Clara came in with 2 cups of coffee she hadn't particularly needed to make, but had made anyway, and set one in front of him. "How much did you leave out?" she said. He looked up. "What makes you think I left anything out?" "You went quiet 3 times when I was listening through the wall. You picked the words up again, but you went quiet first." He looked at his coffee. "There was a boy," he said after a moment. "Maybe 16, one of the wagon train. They'd left him alive, tied to a wheel." He stopped. "I cut him loose. He couldn't talk. I don't know if it was the shock or if they'd done something to his throat. He died about 3 hours later." He paused again. "I didn't tell the deputy because I don't know what he saw before the end, and I don't know if it's useful, and He stopped a 3rd time. Clara waited. "I stayed with him," Silas said, "until he died. I stayed with him, and then I found the girls, and then I rode." He turned the cup in his hands. "I didn't look for survivors after that. I should have checked the other wagons more carefully, but I had the girls and the boy was gone, and I rode." "You might not have found anyone else alive," Clara said. "I know. And if you'd stayed to check every wagon, you might not have gotten far enough before dark. I know that too." "Knowing it doesn't fix it," she said. He looked up at her. Something shifted slightly in his face, surprised maybe that she hadn't tried to talk him out of it. "No," he said, "it doesn't. That's just how it is sometimes." She sat down across from him. "You did what you could. That's not the same as doing everything. It's just what it is." He was quiet for a while. "The twins," he said. "Eleanor and May. Do you think there's family that'll want them?" "I think there might be family that'll claim them. Whether that's the same thing—" She shrugged. "And if there isn't?" She looked at the basket. May was awake, doing the staring thing she did at the ceiling, very serious about whatever she was thinking. Eleanor was asleep with her fist jammed against her own cheek. "Then we figure out what comes next," Claire said. The "we" came out naturally, without calculation, and she noticed it half a second after she'd said it and didn't take it back. Silas noticed it too. She could tell by the way he didn't react, which was its own kind of reaction. The storms came in the 2nd week. Nebraska in summer had 2 temperatures, too hot and trying to kill you. The heat wave that had been sitting over the territory for 3 weeks broke on a Tuesday afternoon with the kind of storm that reminded everyone why the plains had a reputation. It came in from the northwest, green-black sky, dropping the temperature 15 degrees in 20 minutes, and hit the ranch like something with a grudge. Clara got the windows latched and the livestock in before it arrived. Silas got the barn door secured and spent 20 minutes on the roof of the smaller outbuilding with a hammer and a box of nails doing emergency work on a section of roofing that had been meaning to fail since spring. He came in soaking wet with the storm right behind him, and they stood in the kitchen and listened to it go over them. The hail first, small and vicious, rattling against the glass, and then the real rain, and then the wind that made the whole house talk. The twins did not like the storm. Eleanor handled it by crying in a focused, steady rhythm, like she was pacing herself for a long complaint. May handled it by going completely silent, which was somehow more alarming. She just lay in the basket with her eyes wide open, listening to the noise with an expression of profound offense. "She looks like she's taking notes," Silas said. "I think she is." Clara was doing the back-patting rhythm for Eleanor. "On who to blame later?" He picked May up. He'd gotten less careful about it over the past week, less like a man handling something fragile, and more like someone who'd accepted that this was a thing he did now. He sat down in the chair by the stove, which was the warmest part of the room, and held her against his chest and talked to her in the low, even voice that had been working since that first night. "It's just rain," he told her. "It's loud, but it doesn't mean anything. It comes through and then it's over and the air smells better after. That's all it is." She stared at him, unblinking, deeply skeptical. "I know," he said. "I don't love it either." Clara looked at them across the kitchen. The lamp was burning low because she'd turned it down during the lightning. Old habit from a story her mother had told her about lamps and lightning. That was probably nonsense, but was too deeply ingrained to argue with now. In the dim, warm light, Silas looked like something that had been in this kitchen forever, like furniture that had simply always been there. It was unsettling, and it wasn't unsettling at the same time. "Tell me something," she said. "What kind of something?" "Anything. I'm tired of listening to the storm." He thought for a moment. "I was in Abilene once, about 8 years back, working cattle, just passing through. There was a hotel that had a piano in the lobby, and the man who played it was maybe 60 years old and had hands like they didn't belong on a person his age, like a young man's hands on an old man's wrists. He played every evening from 6 to 9, and nobody asked him to stop and nobody asked him to keep going. He just played." Silas looked at May. "I stayed an extra 3 days just to hear him. I don't know why I'm telling you that." "What did he play?" "I don't know the names. Just music." "Was it good?" "It was the best thing I'd heard in years," he paused. "Maybe ever." Clara said nothing for a while. Eleanor had stopped crying and was making the small sounds that preceded sleep, sighing, mostly, and occasionally saying something that wasn't a word in any language but was clearly important. Outside, the storm was easing. Not gone, but past its worst. "My husband used to whistle," Clara said. "Not songs, just notes, in a row, while he worked. I used to find it irritating." She stopped. "I'd give a lot to hear it now." Silas didn't say anything to that, and she was glad. There wasn't anything to say. It was just a true thing, and sometimes true things just needed to sit in the air for a minute before the conversation could move on. The storm passed by midnight. They were both still in the kitchen. The days settled into a shape. Not a comfortable one exactly, and not a permanent one. They both understood that. Nathan was still looking for family. The men from the river crossing were still out there somewhere. Nothing was resolved. But days have a way of developing structure whether you want them to or not, and this one did. Silas was up before her most mornings, coffee made by the time she came out. He'd taken over the fence repairs, then the north pasture gate that had been sagging for months, then the barn roof that had been on her list since winter and kept falling further down it. He didn't ask what needed doing. He looked around until he found it, and then he did it, which was either very helpful or slightly alarming, and Clara had decided it was helpful. She handled the twins and the house and the cooking, which she'd been doing alone for 2 years and could do in her sleep. But there was a difference now. Someone else to hand the baby to when her arms gave out. Someone to talk at over coffee at 5 in the morning when the night had been bad. Someone to say, "Did you hear that?" to when one of the twins made a new sound. Because half the point of watching small things grow was having someone to share the noticing with. She was aware this was getting complicated. She was also too tired to deal with complicated, which meant she put it aside and kept going. It was Nathan who made her stop ignoring it, though not on purpose. He came out on a Thursday, 2.5 weeks after Silas had arrived, and he sat at the kitchen table with his coffee, and he gave them his report. Still looking for the wife's sister, had a line on a cousin in Ohio who'd written back with interest, was building the case against the outfit north of the Platte, but needed more time and more evidence. And then he said, without looking up from his coffee, "People in town are talking." Clara went still. "About what?" she said. "About you having a man living on the property." She looked at him. "I know," Nathan said. "I know, but you asked me to tell you things as they were, not as they ought to be." "What are they saying?" "Nothing that matters, technically. Just that the widow Whitmore has a man staying at her place, and she's got 2 infants, and—" He stopped. "People fill in what they don't know." She looked at Silas, who was looking at the table with an expression that was working hard at being neutral. "That's their business," Clara said. "It is. I'm just telling you." Nathan finished his coffee. "It's a small territory, Clara. People talk. And if it comes to a custody matter with these girls, any complications in your living situation will be raised." After he left, she and Silas sat in silence for a full minute. "I can sleep in the barn," he said. "You're not sleeping in the barn." It wouldn't bother me." "I know it wouldn't bother you. That's not the point." She pressed her fingers against her eyes. "The point is it's ridiculous. It is, he agreed, but he's not wrong about how it'll look. She dropped her hands, looked at him. He looked back at her steady and unhurried, and she noticed for the first time, or maybe noticed clearly for the first time, that he had good eyes, not handsome in a calculated way, just present, like he was actually there, actually looking, not already somewhere else in his head. I'll think about it, she said. All right. She didn't think about it, or she thought about it constantly and arrived nowhere, which amounted to the same thing. What she did think about was June Calloway, who had written a letter asking the world to be kind to her daughters. What she thought about was Eleanor, who was 7 weeks into being alive and had recently discovered that her own hand was an interesting object and spent long minutes examining it with the concentration of a scholar. What she thought about was May, who screamed for 20 minutes every night between 7 and 8 for no reason that Clara could identify, and then stopped as suddenly as she'd started, and immediately fell asleep with the uncomplicated satisfaction of someone who'd said everything they had to say. She thought about 2 winters alone. She thought about her husband's whistling, the non-songs he'd made while working, and how she'd found it irritating and how she'd give a lot to hear it now. She thought about a man who'd ridden 34 miles on a dying horse with borrowed information and 2 strangers' babies strapped to his chest, and had not let go even when he was unconscious, because some part of him had understood, before he could reason it through, that letting go wasn't something he was going to do. That was a particular kind of person. She'd learned that kind was rare. The night Silas finally told her the full story was the night she understood how rare. They were sitting on the porch after the twins were down, a habit that had developed without anyone deciding to develop it. And the air had cooled enough to be pleasant, and the stars were the kind of thick and low that made you feel like you were underneath something rather than outside it. He started talking without her asking. He told her about arriving at the river crossing, about the smell, which he'd known before he'd seen anything, which told him everything he needed to know, about going through the wreckage systematically because there was nothing else to do, because you either acted or you didn't, about finding the boy, about staying with him. And then he told her about finding June. She'd been lying face down over the hatch in the wagon floor. He'd almost moved her without looking, just moved her to check, but something made him look first. And when he looked at her face, he'd understood what she'd done, that she'd arranged herself that way on purpose, that she'd lain down over that hatch while she still had the strength to arrange herself, and that she'd held that position. She had her cheek against the floor, he said, so she could hear them. Whether they were still, he stopped. She wanted the last thing she heard to be them. Clara didn't say anything. I found a good place, he said, on a hill above the river. I put her there. I put them all somewhere, the ones I could. The boy, too. He looked at his hands. I don't know if that matters. It felt like it should matter. It matters, Clara said. I keep thinking I should have done more, or faster, or... Silas. He stopped. You carried those girls 34 miles when you could barely stay in the saddle. You stayed with a dying boy when you could have ridden. You buried people you didn't know because you thought it should matter. She looked at him directly. What exactly would more look like? He was quiet for a long time. I don't know, he finally said. Neither do I. She looked back at the stars. That's usually what it means when you've done enough. You can't figure out what more would be. He exhaled slowly. Something in his shoulders dropped a half-inch. They sat there for another hour, saying less than that, which was enough. Down in the house, Eleanor and May slept in their basket, which was truly too small for them now. She was going to have to build or buy something else soon, and the prairie night went on being enormous and quiet and indifferent to everything, the way it always was. But here, on this specific porch, it didn't feel quite like indifference. It felt like space, like enough room for something to be different than it had been before. The letter from Ohio arrived on a Friday. Clara was in the yard when the supply boy brought it out. 13 years old, rode for 3 different ranches in the territory, and took his job with a seriousness that most adults didn't manage. He handed her the envelope without comment, touched the brim of his hat, and rode back out the way he'd come. She stood in the yard and looked at the return address. Ashcroft V. Cincinnati, Ohio. She brought it inside and set it on the table and looked at it for a while before she opened it. The handwriting was nothing like June Calloway's careful, school-taught script. This was large and assured. The letters slanted forward like they were in a hurry to get somewhere. The woman introduced herself as Vivian Ashcroft, née Calloway, the elder sister of Thomas Calloway, who had been Eleanor and May's father. She wrote that she had received word of the tragedy through Sheriff Hale's office and that she extended her deepest sympathies, and then she wrote, with the same momentum and no transition whatsoever, that she intended to travel to Nebraska to collect her nieces and bring them east to be raised in proper circumstances. She did not ask whether this was convenient. She did not ask whether it was what anyone else wanted. She provided her anticipated arrival date, 3 weeks hence, and requested confirmation that the children would be ready for travel. Clara read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer where she kept the important papers and went back outside to finish what she'd been doing. She didn't mention it to Silas until that evening, after the twins were down and they were on the porch in their usual positions. She handed him the letter without saying anything first. He read it in the failing light. Read it again. "Ready for travel," he said. That's what it says." He handed it back. She could see him working through it, the set of his jaw, the way he was looking out at the dark line of the horizon like it owed him something. "Nathan know about this?" "Not yet. I'll send word tomorrow." "And what does Nathan think about it, legally?" "I don't know yet." She folded the letter. "Blood relation has a strong claim. That's just how it is." "She's never met them. Doesn't matter to the law." He was quiet. The night was warm and the air smelled like the grass had given up trying to stay green and had started the long, slow process of going gold. End of summer coming in at the edges. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She looked at the letter in her hands. "I want to know who she is before I decide what I want to do." It was the most honest answer she had, and he seemed to understand it was all she had, because he didn't push. What Clara didn't say, what she wasn't ready to say, even to herself, was that she'd started thinking of Eleanor and May as hers, not legally, not officially, just in the way you think about things that have become the organizing fact of your days, the first thing you think about when you wake up and the last thing you check before you sleep. She knew the exact pitch of Eleanor's hunger cry versus her tired cry. She knew that May could go from fine to furious in the time it took to look away. She knew that Eleanor had started smiling, not gas, actual smiling, a real response to a familiar face, and that the first time it had happened, Clara had stood in the kitchen absolutely still for 10 seconds because something in her chest had moved that she hadn't felt move in 2 years. None of that was legal. None of it would matter to a judge. She knew it. She just wasn't ready to let it matter yet. Vivian Ashcroft arrived on a Wednesday, 3 weeks to the day from her letter, which suggested she was a woman who did what she said she would do and expected the same from everyone else. She came in a hired coach from the rail station, which was 20 miles south. She'd sent a second letter ahead to confirm the arrangement, which Clara had read twice looking for a different tone and not found one. Clara and Silas were both in the yard when the coach came up the drive, which was something Clara had planned, though she hadn't said so. She wanted Silas visible. She wanted it clear that this household had more than one person in it. Vivian stepped out of the coach with the practiced ease of someone who was always stepping in or out of things. She was perhaps 50, with the dark hair going silver at the temples and the kind of face that had once been pretty and had matured into something more interesting. She was dressed well. Not extravagantly, but well, the kind of well that cost money but didn't announce it. She looked at the ranch with an expression that gave nothing away. Then she looked at Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said. Not a question. "Miss Ashcroft." Clara extended her hand and Vivian shook it with a firm, dry grip. "This is Silas Boone. He's the man who found your nieces." Vivian turned to Silas and looked at him for a moment in a way that was assessing without being rude about it. "I understand I have you to thank for bringing them out of that situation alive." "I did what I could," Silas said. "Your modesty is noted." She turned back to the ranch house. "I'd like to see the girls." It wasn't a request exactly. It wasn't quite an order either. It lived in the territory between them, which Clara suspected was where Vivian Ashcroft spent most of her time. She brought her inside. Eleanor and May were in the main room, in the proper wooden cradle that Silas had built 3 weeks ago to replace the laundry basket. It had taken him 4 days and was not his best work structurally, he'd said so himself, but it held together. And it was the right size, and he'd sanded the edges until nothing could catch on anything. The twins were awake. Eleanor was in the middle of examining her hand again, the scholarly enterprise she'd been engaged in for 2 weeks. May was asleep with her eyes half open, which was something she did that Clara had decided not to think about too hard. Vivian stopped in the doorway. She looked at them for a long time without moving. Clara watched her face. She'd been bracing for something. She wasn't sure what. Maybe the woman reaching for the nearest one immediately, announcing a departure date, something that would make the fight clear. But what she saw instead was harder to prepare for. Vivian Ashcroft stood in the doorway of a Nebraska ranch house looking at her dead brother's daughters, and something crossed her face that was entirely private and entirely real. Grief working its way through a woman who had clearly decided not to let it show and was losing that fight for just a few seconds. Then she straightened, walked forward, crouched down beside the cradle with a grace that said her knees were better than Clara's. "Hello," she said quietly. To both of them, to neither of them, to the air above the cradle. Eleanor turned her head toward the sound. May's half-open eyes tracked, unfocused. Vivian didn't reach in. She just looked. After a moment, she stood up. "They look healthy," she said. Her voice was even, professional almost. "They're eating well," Clara said. "Eleanor's ahead on weight for her age. May's right where she should be." Vivian turned. "You know which is which." "I do." "How?" "Eleanor has a birthmark behind her left ear. May screams every night from 7 to 8 and then falls asleep like nothing happened." Something shifted at the corner of Vivian's mouth. Not quite a smile. "That sounds like her mother." It was the first time she'd mentioned June, and Clara didn't respond to it because there wasn't a right response and she knew it. "I'd like to stay a few days," Vivian said, "before any decisions are made. I'd like to see them, understand what their situation is." Clara had prepared herself for a fight and hadn't prepared herself for this. "That's fine," she said. "You're welcome to stay." The next 4 days were the strangest Clara had lived through since the night Silas had shown up at her gate, which was saying something. Vivian was not an easy woman. She had opinions, and she had them loudly, and she was not interested in softening them for the comfort of the room. She thought the ranch house was cold in the evenings and said so. She thought Clara's method of feeding the twins could be improved and described how. She watched Silas work in the yard with an expression that said she was still calculating what he was and hadn't finished yet. But she also got up at 4 in the morning the second night, without being asked, when both twins were screaming, and she took Eleanor and stood at the window with her and rocked her in a way that was practiced. Clara, coming out of the bedroom half asleep, stopped in the doorway. "I had children," Vivian said without turning. "A long time ago. My husband died when they were small. I know the 4 o'clock hour." Clara hadn't known any of that. She went and got May, and they stood at opposite windows, rocking in the dark, and didn't talk. On the third day, Silas found Vivian in the barn. He'd gone out to check on the mare, who'd been favoring her left front since Monday, and found the Cincinnati woman sitting on a hay bale with her good dress and her composed face, staring at nothing in particular. He stood in the barn door. "You need something out here?" "I needed a moment," she said, "away from the house." He came in and sat on the hay bale against the opposite wall. The mayor watched them both with the patient suspicion horses had for humans who came into barns for non-horse reasons. "You knew my sister-in-law," Vivian said. Not a question. She'd read the letter. Nathan had shared it, or Clara had. Silas didn't know which. "I knew of her," he said. "What she did." "I didn't know her. She was stubborn," Vivian said. "June. She did things her own way, whether you agreed or not. Thomas loved that about her, and it drove him insane in equal measure." She looked at the barn floor. "I didn't go to the wedding. I thought Thomas was making a mistake, marrying a woman that willful." She paused. "I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things, looking back." Silas said nothing. "Do you think they're happy here?" she said. "The girls." He looked at his hands. "I think they don't know enough yet to be happy or unhappy. They know who feeds them and who holds them and who talks to them in the night." He paused. "They know Clara." Vivian was quiet for a while. "She loves them." "Yes." "And you?" He looked up. "Not accusing," she said. Observing. I'm very good at observing. She looked at him steadily. What are your intentions toward this household, mister? Boone? It was the kind of direct question that most people in the territory would have walked around for 6 months. He found, to his surprise, that he didn't mind it. I haven't worked that out fully, he said. At least you're honest. I try to be. She nodded slowly, stood up, brushed hay off her skirt with the efficiency of a woman who didn't waste motion. I came here expecting a temporary arrangement, a kind neighbor keeping infants alive until the family could collect them. She moved toward his barn door. That is not what I found. She walked out into the afternoon light, and Silas sat with the mare for a few more minutes before going after her. The trouble came before Vivian left. It came on a Thursday evening, 6 days into her stay, and it announced itself the way trouble usually did on the frontier, with no particular warning and at the worst possible time. Silas was in the yard after dinner, doing a last check of the property before dark, which had become routine. He walked the fence line on the south side, checked the barn latch, came back around the east corner of the house. The light was going fast, the sky doing the purple-orange thing it did in that last 20 minutes before dark. He saw the rider on the ridge, just one, a quarter-mile out, sitting still, watching. He stood in the shadow of the house and watched back. The rider didn't move, didn't come closer, just sat on the ridge in the failing light, looking down at the ranch. After 3 minutes, the rider turned and rode north. Silas went inside. He didn't say anything at dinner. Vivian was there, and there was no reason to alarm her with something he wasn't sure about yet. But after she'd gone to the room Clara had made up for her, he told Clara. She stood in the kitchen and heard him out. Could be anyone, she said, but her voice said she didn't think it was just anyone. It could be, he agreed, but they were looking at the house specifically, not the road, not passing through. What do you want to do? I'm going to ride out to Hale tomorrow morning. Tonight I want the rifle where you can reach it. She nodded. She didn't argue about the rifle, which told him she'd been thinking about it too. Nathan came to the ranch instead of waiting for Silas. He was already on his way when they met on the road, which meant he had something to say and hadn't wanted to say it at the office. They all stood in the kitchen, Nathan, Silas, Clara, and Vivian, who had refused to be elsewhere when she saw the sheriff ride up. We have a problem, Nathan said. He set his hat on the table. I've been building the case against the Double Bar R outfit for 3 weeks. The name I mentioned, the man running it, his name is Cutter Vane. He's been working this territory for 2 years under a livestock trading operation. Moving cattle, sure. Moving other things, too. He looked at Silas. He knows you survived the river crossing. Silas was still. He knows you found the girls, Nathan continued. He knows where you are. How? Clara said. Town talks, Silas said quietly. Nathan nodded. I'm sorry, I should have thought about that earlier. Someone in town mentioned the cowboy staying at the Whitmore Ranch, the one who'd brought in the orphan babies. It moved faster than I expected. He looked at Clara. The rider you saw last night, I think that was a scout. Vane's been careful for 2 years because he doesn't leave witnesses. Vivian, who had been silent, said, You're saying these men are going to come here? I'm saying they might, Nathan said, which is why I'm here. I want to move you all into town. No, Silas said. Everyone looked at him. Moving them into town puts them on the road, he said, in the open. If Vane's watching and he sees a wagon with 2 infants heading for town, that's an easy target. Here we've got walls, sight lines, cover. He looked at Nathan. How many men do you trust? Nathan looked at him for a moment. 3 deputies I'd bet my life on. Maybe 2 of the ranchers east of here. Bring them out. Tonight if you can. Silas turned to Clara. How many ranch hands can you get back here by morning? 2, she said. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not scared, not that. Something else. Like she was seeing something clearly that she'd been looking at sideways for weeks. And my neighbor Denton, if I send word, he'll come. That's 8 people, including us, Silas said. Against how many on Vane's side? Best count I have is 6 men who ride with him regular, Nathan said. Could be more. He won't bring all of them, Silas said. Not for a ranch in the open. He'll send a small group, quiet, and he'll think the element of surprise is his. He looked at Nathan. Let's take it away from him. Vivian made a sound, not quite a laugh. "You've done this before," she said. "Done what?" "Turned a situation around before it could turn you." She studied him. "You know how this works." "I know how some things work," he said. Clara sent for Denton. Nathan rode hard back to town for his deputies. Silas spent the remaining daylight hours walking the property perimeter twice, standing at each corner and calculating what could be seen from where, what the approach angles were, where a man on horseback would naturally come from in the dark. He'd spent enough years moving through country that needed thinking about to know how other people thought about it. The ranch hands arrived before midnight. Nathan's deputies came at 1 in the morning, tired and grave-faced, but there. Denton came from the east, a big, quiet man in his 60s who'd been a neighbor since Clara's husband had broken ground here. He'd brought his own rifle and 2 boxes of shells and said about 4 words total and seemed to think that was sufficient. Vivian put the twins in Clara's bedroom, in the center of the house, away from every window. She sat in the chair beside the cradle for the rest of the night without being asked. Clara found her there at 2 in the morning when she checked. "You should sleep," Clara said. "You should stop telling people things they're not going to do," Vivian said. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, they were just 2 women in a dark room with 2 sleeping infants between them, and the house was quiet. And outside, men were arranged in positions with rifles, and the night was doing what the night did, going on, slow and enormous, entirely indifferent to the human arrangements being made inside it. "If something happens to me," Clara said. She stopped. "Nothing's going to happen to you," Vivian said. "I'm not being morbid. I'm being practical." Clara looked at the cradle. "If something happens to me, I need you to know that they need Eleanor to be patted in a slow rhythm, and May needs to be held still and talked at. They need those specific things, or they won't sleep." Vivian looked at her. Something in her face shifted and settled. "I know," she said. "I've been watching." Clara nodded. She went back out to the main room. Silas was at the front window. She came and stood beside him. Outside, the prairie was dark and flat and quiet. Stars overhead, no moon yet. "How long?" she said. "Could be tonight. Could be tomorrow night." He didn't move from the window. "Could be he decides it's not worth it. But I don't think he decides that." "Why not?" "Because I'm the only person who was at that river crossing who's still breathing and who can identify what he was operating out there. Every week I'm alive is a week I might get in front of a judge." He paused. "He has to come." She looked at his profile in the dark. The jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he was still in the way he was always still. Like the stillness was a decision he made and kept making. "Silas," she said. "Whatever happens tonight." She stopped, started again. "I want you to know that what you did, riding those 34 miles, staying with that boy, burying people you didn't know." She looked at him. "June Calloway asked the world to be kind to her daughters, and the world sent you. I think she'd want to know that." He turned from the window, looked at her in the dark. She could see his face clearly enough, the way something moved through it that he didn't bother trying to keep from showing. "Clara, don't say anything. Just know it." He was quiet for a moment. "All right." They heard it before they saw anything. The horses, coming from the north, 2 of them, and then a third, moving slow with the careful quiet of men who thought they were unheard. Silas moved away from the window without a word. The arrangement they'd made held. Nathan's deputies had the north angle. Denton and the ranch hands had the east and west. Silas took the door. What happened in the next 20 minutes was not clean or quick, or anything like it looks when men later tell it in the warm safety of a saloon. It was noise and dark and the horrible compressed chaos of a situation going multiple directions at once. 2 of Vane's men came off their horses before they reached the fence line, deputies moving from cover. A third made the porch, and Silas met him there in the doorway, and it was not a graceful thing. And Silas came away from it with something wrong in his left side, ribs or maybe worse, he couldn't tell yet. The 4th man turned and ran. Silas went after him on foot for 50 yards before he accepted that his body was not going to make the distance and stopped. He stood in the dark field behind the house, breathing badly, and heard the hoofbeats fade north. He turned around. The ranch house windows were lit. He could see movement inside. He started walking back, one arm across his ribs, and he got to the porch and put his hand on the doorframe and stood there for a moment before going in. Not scared, just needing a second. Clara opened the door from the inside. She looked at him, at his arm across his ribs, at his face. "How bad?" she said. "I don't think it's the worst kind of bad," he said, "but it's not nothing." She stepped back and let him in. He sat in the kitchen chair, the one on the left, his usual, and she knelt down in front of him and started working on the buttons of his shirt to find out what was underneath. "The girls?" he said. "Fine. Vivian's with them." "Nathan?" "He's all right. Deputy Marsh has a cut on his arm. Denton is annoyed about a fence post." She paused at what she found, looked up at him. "It's your ribs." "Yeah. 2, I think. Maybe 3. Can you wrap them?" "I've done it before." She went for the cloth. He sat in the chair with his shirt open and let her work and tried to breathe at the volume the wrapped ribs would allow, which was less than he would have preferred. "You caught the one on the porch," she said while she worked. "He's outside, breathing. He'll be available for questioning." "What about Vane himself?" "Didn't come personally, sent his men." He paused. "That means he'll try again. Or it means Nathan has what he needs to go get him now." He thought about it. "Maybe. Not maybe," Nathan said from the doorway. Clara and Silas both looked up. Nathan was dusty and had someone else's blood on his left sleeve, but was otherwise intact. He had an expression on his face that was the closest thing to satisfaction Clara had seen from him. "One of the men I have outside is talking already. Wants to make a deal. He'll give me Vane's location, Vane's operation, everything." He looked at Silas. "We'll have him by morning." Silas let that settle. Let himself believe it, slowly, the way you let yourself believe something you've been afraid to count on. "Good," he said. "Ribs?" Nathan said. "Ribs," Silas confirmed. Nathan nodded, went back out to manage the situation in his slow, careful way. Clara finished wrapping. She tied the last knot and sat back on her heels and looked at him. He looked back at her. The kitchen was warm and the lamp was too bright after the dark outside, and somewhere in the bedroom Vivian was talking to the twins in a voice just low enough that they couldn't make out words, just the even reassuring sound of someone present and paying attention. "You need to sleep," Clara said. "So do you. I'm going to check on the girls first." "I'll be here." She stood up. Her hand rested on his shoulder for a moment. Not medical, not practical, just there. And then she went down the hall toward the bedroom. He sat in the chair and breathed carefully and looked at the kitchen table, at the drawer where the important papers were, at the ordinary walls of the most unexpected place he'd found himself in years. He was still there when the sun came up. Nathan was as good as his word. By mid-morning, he'd ridden out with both deputies and Denton's oldest son, who knew the Northern Territory better than anyone and had volunteered without being asked. The man from the porch, the one Silas had put down in the doorway, had spent 2 hours talking in Nathan's careful custody, and what he'd given up was apparently enough, because Nathan left with purpose in his posture and came back before sundown with cutter Vane and irons, and 2 more men who'd been found at a camp 12 miles north and hadn't put up much of a fight once they understood the count was against them. Silas heard about it from the kitchen chair, where he'd spent most of the day because Clara had told him to stay there and his ribs had agreed with her. Nathan came in briefly to give the report, stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands the way he did, and laid out what they'd found at the camp. Evidence of the river crossing operation. Stolen goods still in a wagon. A ledger, of all things. Vane had kept records, which Nathan said was either arrogance or stupidity, and was probably both. "He'll hang," Nathan said. Not with satisfaction, just with the flatness of a man who'd been in the territory long enough to know what happened to men who did what Vane had done and got caught doing it. "The ledger covers the river crossing?" Silas asked. "Covers enough. Combined with your testimony and the letter June Calloway left, yes." Nathan looked at him. "You're going to need to come in and sign a formal statement when you're able. Nothing urgent, but it'll be needed for the proceeding." "I'll be there." Nathan nodded, looked at the ribs. "How bad?" "Manageable." "He's lying," Clara said from the stove without turning around. "I'm not lying. I'm rounding down." Nathan made a sound that was as close to a laugh as he generally got. He put his hat back on. I'll see myself out. When he was gone, the kitchen settled back into its usual sounds. The stove, the twins in the other room, the wind finding the gaps in the window framing that Silas had been meaning to fix and hadn't gotten to yet. Vivian was with the girls, had been most of the day, and the sounds coming through the wall were the particular sounds of someone learning how two specific infants worked. Clara could hear her adjusting, the rhythm of patting that was Eleanor's rhythm, the low, even talking that May required. Silas shifted in the chair and made a sound he tried to keep quiet. "Stop moving," Clara said. "I wasn't—" "You were. Stop." He stopped, looked at the ceiling for a moment. "It's going to be fine in a week. It's going to be worse tomorrow before it's fine in a week. That's how ribs go." "I know how ribs go." "Then stop acting surprised by them." She came to the table and set a plate in front of him that she'd been keeping warm on the back of the stove. "Eat." He looked at the plate, then at her. "You've been feeding me for 6 weeks. You've been doing fence work and barn repairs for 6 weeks. It balances out. That's not—" He stopped, looked at the food. "Thank you, Clara." She'd turned back to the stove so he couldn't see her face when he said it. She was glad. She wasn't sure what was on her face right now, and she needed a moment with it before she showed it to anyone. The kitchen was quiet for a while. "Vivian's been good with them," she said finally. "Yeah." He'd been watching the wall too, listening to the sounds from the other room. "She surprised me. She surprises me every day." Clara came and sat across from him, not with food, just with her hands around a coffee cup. She told me about her husband and her children. The youngest died when he was 4 from a fever. Silas went still. "She doesn't talk about it readily," Clara said, "but she said she came out here expecting to find 2 orphaned babies in a temporary situation. She said she thought she was coming to collect them and bring them somewhere safe." She looked at her coffee cup. "She said she didn't expect to find something that already was somewhere safe." The silence that followed that was the kind that had weight to it, not uncomfortable, just heavy with the thing neither of them had been saying directly for weeks. "What does she want?" he said. Careful, like the question had edges. "I don't know yet. I think she's still figuring it out." Clara looked up. "She asked me this morning what I wanted, for the girls, officially." "What did you say?" "I told her I wanted to adopt them." She said it flat and clear, the way she'd been practicing saying it in her head for 3 days. "I told her I understood she had a legal claim, and I wasn't asking her to give that up without understanding what she'd be giving it up for. But I told her what I wanted." Silas looked at her for a long moment. "And?" "She didn't say no." Clara turned the cup in her hands. "She didn't say yes, either. She said she needed to think." He nodded slowly. "And you?" she said. "What do you want?" "For them." The question landed in the room and sat there. He looked at her across the table, really looked. Not the sideways looks they'd been exchanging for weeks, but directly, with the stillness that was a decision he made and kept making. "You know what I want?" he said. "I want you to say it." He was quiet for a moment. "I want to stay," he said. If there's room for that." "There's room," she said. Her voice was even. Her hands on the cup were completely still. "There's been room." He looked at her for another long moment, and she looked back. And it was one of those exchanges that didn't need any more words than that, which was fortunate because neither of them apparently had more words. Then he looked down at his plate and picked up his fork, and she turned back to the stove. And the kitchen went on being the kitchen, ordinary and warm and smelling like food and lamp oil, and the faint clean smell that came in through the window gap from the evening air outside. But Vivian made her decision on the 4th morning after Vane's arrest. She came to breakfast, a thing she'd been doing, integrating into the household routine without being asked, which Clara had noticed and filed. And she sat down and waited until everyone had coffee and the twins were settled. Eleanor on Clara's knee and May in the wooden cradle within arm's reach. And then she folded her hands on the table and said she wanted to talk. Clara said, "All right." "I came here," Vivian said, "with a plan. I've always had plans. I find it difficult to operate without them." The plan was to assess the situation, determine that the arrangement was temporary and inadequate. Nothing personal, I simply assumed, and then provide Thomas's daughters with what I considered a proper upbringing. Education, society, financial stability, the things I could give them in Cincinnati that a ranch in Nebraska could not. She looked at her hands. I was also, and I will be honest about this, lonely. My children are grown and gone. My husband has been dead for 14 years. My brother and his wife and the life they were building. That's also gone now. She looked up. I wanted something to come home to. I wanted them. Clara said nothing. Silas said nothing. But wanting something, Vivian continued, does not mean it belongs to you. The room was quiet enough that the sound of Eleanor gnawing on Clara's thumb, a new habit she was working on her first tooth, was clearly audible. I watched you, Vivian said. She was looking at Clara directly now. For 4 days I watched you, the way you know exactly what each of them needs and when, the way you get up at 4 in the morning without anger just because that's what's needed, the way you... She stopped. The way you talk to them, not at them, to them, like they're people already, like they've been people all along. She paused. June would have done it that way. Clara's throat did something involuntary that she managed to keep off her face. And you, Vivian said to Silas, I watched you too. You didn't do what most men would have done out at that river crossing. Most men would have ridden to the nearest town and turned the problem over to someone else and told themselves they'd done enough. She looked at him steadily. You carried them. You kept them. You brought them here because you trusted your instinct about who would care for them, and your instinct was correct. She looked between them. These girls know your voices. They know your hands. They know the way this house smells and sounds. That's not something you can pick up and move to Cincinnati and call an improvement. The silence that followed was very long. What are you saying? Clara said. Careful. She didn't want to hear what she thought Vivian was saying and be wrong about it. I'm saying, Vivian said slowly, like each word was placed with intention, that I will relinquish my custody claim. Formally, legally, completely. She held Clara's gaze. If you'll let me stay. Clara looked at her. Stay. Not permanently. I'm not proposing to move into your house. I have a life in Cincinnati, but I want to be part of their lives, their aunt. A real one, not a name on paper. I want to come for Christmas and for summers, and when things are difficult and when things are good. She stopped. Thomas was my brother. They're all that's left of him. I don't want to take them away from the life they have. I just don't want to lose them entirely. Clara looked at Silas. He looked at her. It was one of those exchanges that had a whole conversation in it and no words. Vivian, Clara said. She turned back. The girls are going to grow up knowing their father's family. That was never in question. She paused. But you should know. If I adopt them legally, they're mine. They're Whitmore girls. And this ranch... She glanced at Silas. This ranch is their home. Whatever else changes, that's what it is. Vivian looked at Silas, too. Whatever else changes, she repeated, and the slight emphasis made it clear she understood exactly what she was being told without being told it. Yes, Clara said. Vivian looked at her hands one more time. Then she looked up at Eleanor, who had finished with the thumb, and was now regarding the entire table of adults with the evaluative expression of a small person who understood more than she was letting on. Then I'll write to Nathan Hale this morning, she said, and I'll write to my attorney in Cincinnati. Clara breathed out slowly. It came from somewhere deep. Thank you, she said. Vivian shook her head once, briskly, the way women do when sentiment is threatening to make the moment into more than they can manage. Don't. I'm doing this for them, and perhaps a little for myself, not for gratitude. Chund. Nathan came out 3 days later with the paperwork, which he laid on the kitchen table with the manner of a man who'd spent more time on something than he'd let on. Vivian had been true to her word. The letter to her Cincinnati attorney had gone out the morning after her decision, and she'd written a supplementary statement for Nathan's records that afternoon, clear, precise, and apparently watertight, because Nathan read it and said it was one of the better constructed legal documents he'd seen from a non-lawyer. "She's thorough," he said without surprise. "She's everything thoroughly," Clara said. The adoption paperwork was more complicated. It would need to go through the territorial court, and Nathan outlined the process in his careful way, step by step, the time frame, what was needed from Clara, what was needed from Silas. He said from Silas naturally, without explaining why, and Silas noticed that and said nothing. After Nathan left, Vivian started packing her trunk. She'd been saying she needed to get back to Cincinnati for 2 days, but she'd kept finding reasons to stay another morning, and Clara had stopped noting the contradiction because she didn't mind it. "You'll write," Clara said. She was folding one of Vivian's blouses that had gotten mixed in with the laundry. It had happened twice in the 2 weeks she'd been there, and neither of them had mentioned it. "Regularly," Vivian said. "I expect letters back. I will not accept excuses about how busy the ranch is. I'll write when I can. You'll write when I write to you, which will be often." Vivian took the folded blouse without looking up. "I want to know how they're growing. I want measurements, and I want to know when the first tooth comes in, and I want to know what May's first word is." "May's first word is going to be a complaint," Clara said. "Then I want to know what she's complaining about." Something in Vivian's voice shifted, softened a half note, just briefly. "I want to know them." "You will," Clara said. "That's a promise." Vivian looked up. It was one of the rare moments when her composure was entirely down. Just a woman looking at another woman across a bedroom with 2 weeks of complicated feeling between them. "You're going to be good at this," she said. "You already are." Clara didn't say anything. She went to help carry the trunk. The hired coach came at 10. Vivian said goodbye to the twins in the main room, Eleanor first, whom she held for a full minute with the careful practice of someone who'd decided to memorize the weight. Then May, who looked up at her with the particular expression of a baby who is reserving judgment. "She doesn't trust easily," Vivian said. "She trusts eventually," Clara said. "It just has to be earned." "She's definitely June's daughter." Vivian set May down gently. She straightened, turned, and looked at Silas, who was standing near the door. "Mr. Boone." "Miss Ashcroft." She looked at him for a moment in the assessing way she had. "Don't let this man be stupid," she said to Clara. "I'm working on it," Clara said. Vivian made a sound that was a real laugh, brief and genuine, and went out the door. She didn't look back at the house. Clara had noticed that about her. Vivian Ashcroft always looked forward. Looking back was something she'd decided not to do, and she'd apparently made that decision a long time ago and kept it. The coach moved down the drive and turned onto the road south, and the dust settled, and it was quiet. Silas and Clara stood on the porch and watched it go. "She's not what I expected," he said. "She's exactly what she said she was," Clara said. "She just said it in the wrong order at first." He leaned on the porch rail. His ribs were better. Not good, but better. And he'd been doing less work and more standing and watching things, which he bore with the patience of a man who'd accepted that his body was making a reasonable argument. "She was right about one thing," he said. "Which thing?" "That I should stop being stupid." Clara looked at him sideways. He was looking at the road where the dust had settled, the faint tracks where the coach wheels had pressed into the dry earth. "Silas, I've been here 7 weeks," he said, "and I've been careful about how I say things because I didn't know if I had the right to say them. I came here with nothing except someone else's children and a borrowed shirt, and I wasn't sure what I was entitled to want." She waited. "But I don't think that's the right way to think about it anymore," he said. "I think I've been here long enough to know what this is, what I feel about it, about you." He turned and looked at her directly. "And I think you know it too. I just haven't said it out loud." Clara looked at him. The morning light was doing what morning light did in late summer. Long and warm and angled, and it caught the side of his face and made him look like the version of himself that wasn't careful or provisional or uncertain, just present. "Then say it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't know what to say, she could tell. Because he was choosing the right words, the actual ones, not the nearest available ones. "I love you," he said. "I love those girls. I love this house and this land and the way you talk to people like you mean it, and the way you don't take anything I say as more than it is, and the way you got up at 4 in the morning for 7 weeks without once making anyone feel bad about needing you." He paused. "I want to stay. Not as hired help. Not as whatever this careful version of this is. I want to stay as the person who's here when things are hard and here when things aren't. I want to be their father, if that's—" He stopped. "It is," she said. He looked at her. "It is," she said again. He let out a breath. It was the kind of breath that comes from somewhere you've been holding for a long time without realizing it. He reached out and put his hand against her face, just for a moment, carefully, because his ribs were still making arguments and sudden movements were inadvisable, and she put her hand over his. Then she stepped back, because May had started the 7 to 8 screaming, which was early today, and it required both of them. He followed her inside, and the screen door banged shut behind them, and the ranch was quiet again in the way it was quiet when it was full of people. The wedding was in October, not a large affair. Clara had no interest in large affairs, and Silas had even less, and the girls were too young to have opinions about it and had them anyway. Nathan Hale stood as witness. Denton and his wife came from the east, and 3 of the ranch hands who'd been there the night Vane's men came, and the supply boy who'd been bringing Clara her weekly goods for 2 years, and seemed to feel personally invested in the outcome. A woman from town named Mrs. Pritchard, who'd been making pointed remarks about the widow Whitmore's living situation since August, sent a gift 3 days before the ceremony. It was a quilt, handmade, careful, beautiful. Clara left it on the bed in the main room where everyone could see it and said nothing about it to anyone, which was a more complete response than any words would have been. The ceremony was brief. Nathan read from the document he'd prepared, the simple legal language of it, and Clara and Silas said the words required and signed where required, and that was what it was. Afterwards, standing in the yard with the October sun going sideways across everything, Silas held May, who had stopped screaming today at 6:50, a new record, and Clara held Eleanor, who was working on the tooth that still hadn't come in and was treating the delay as a personal injustice. "Well," Clara said. "Well," Silas agreed. "Nothing's actually different," she said. "No," he said, "except legally." "And the name." "And the name." She looked at him. "How does Boone feel?" "Same as it always did." He looked at her. "How does Mrs. Boone feel?" She thought about it. "Like something that was already true that now has a word." He nodded. That seemed right to him. Denton's wife was at the food table making an elaborate project of the pie she'd brought. Nathan was talking to one of the ranch hands. The supply boy was making faces at Eleanor in the way 13-year-olds do when they encounter babies and are trying to look casual about finding them interesting. The afternoon was ordinary in the specific way that good days sometimes are. No grand feeling to them, just the feeling of being exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, and knowing it. Clara had forgotten that feeling existed. She'd thought it had been a thing she'd had once, briefly, and lost, and that was just the shape of it. She'd been wrong. She'd been wrong about what shape it could take, and what it cost to find it again, and who could help you carry it. Eleanor made a sound, not the tooth complaint, something else, something new. Clara looked down at her. Eleanor was smiling, not the maybe gas smile she'd been doing for weeks, a real one, directed upward, looking at Clara's face with the full attention of a 4-month-old who had decided this specific person was worth smiling at on purpose. Clara stood in the yard of her ranch on a Tuesday in October with her husband beside her and a baby smiling up at her, and her throat doing the involuntary thing it had been doing for 3 months, and she decided that she didn't need to keep it off her face anymore. She smiled back. In the legal paperwork that Nathan had filed with the territorial court the previous week, the adoption petition, meticulous and thorough, 2 pages in his steady handwriting, the girls were listed as Eleanor Calloway Boone and May Calloway Boone. The middle name was Clara's idea. She'd suggested it to Silas one evening without much preamble, and he'd looked at her and said yes without deliberating, because they'd both been thinking it for weeks and just needed one of them to say it first. The Calloway name stayed. It would always stay. That was the point. You didn't erase where people came from just because you were part of where they were going. A woman named June had hidden her daughters under a wagon floor and lain down on top of them and held on, and the least the living could do was carry her name forward. That was what the living owed the dead. Not grief, exactly, not monuments, just the decision to keep going with what they'd left behind, and to do it well, and to not waste what had been given at such a price. Clara understood that now in a way she hadn't when she'd first read June's letter on the kitchen floor. She understood it the way you understand things that have worked themselves into you through months of daily practice, not as an idea, but as something lived, something in the body. The sun moved. The October afternoon did what October afternoons in Nebraska did, went gold and then amber, and then started toward dark, the temperature dropping 10 degrees in the hour before sunset, the air smelling like dry grass and coming winter, and the particular clean smell of the end of things that were ending at their right time. Inside the house the cradle Silas had built was too small now. He'd been working on a larger one for a month, in the evenings after the girls were down, using better wood than the first time and taking more care with the joints. It wasn't finished yet. It would be finished by the end of the month. It would hold them for another year, maybe more, and then they'd need something else, and he'd build that too. That was how it worked. You built what was needed, and then you built what came next, and you kept building. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The tooth came in on a Wednesday. Eleanor's, the bottom left, the one she'd been working on for 6 weeks with the focus and persistence of someone who understood that the only way through a difficult thing was straight at it. Clara found it at the morning feeding, felt the hard edge of it against her finger, and said out loud to the empty kitchen, "There it is, the way you say things when the small victories finally arrive and there's no one yet awake to tell." Silas came in from the barn 20 minutes later, and she showed him. He looked at Eleanor's open mouth with the seriousness of a man being shown something important, which it was. "The other one will follow," Clara said. "How long?" "Week, maybe 2. She'll be miserable the whole time." Eleanor, as if aware she was being discussed, bit down on Clara's thumb with the new tooth. Clara extracted it with practiced efficiency. "She's proud of it," Silas said. "She should be. It took long enough." May, watching from the cradle, the new one, finished 3 weeks after the wedding, solid and square and sanded until nothing could catch on anything, made a sound that was either commentary or coincidence. She'd been making more sounds lately, a whole private language of them, and the household had gotten into the habit of treating them as opinions, which May seemed to find appropriate. That was November. The winter came in the usual way, not dramatically, but with the steady intention of something that knew it had all the time it needed. The temperature dropped and kept dropping. The grass went the color of old straw. The sky went white most days, a flat particular white that meant snow was coming even when it wasn't here yet. Silas winterized the barn. He'd done it efficiently, with the knowledge of someone who'd spent winters outdoors and understood what the cold could find if you left it a way in. He banked the foundation of the house on 3 sides, replaced the gap in the north window frame that had been letting the wind in since September, put up a windbreak of posts and boards along the west fence that Denton had told him was unnecessary and that kept the worst of the January wind off the livestock when January arrived, and proved Denton wrong. Clara didn't say "I told you so" on Silas's behalf. She didn't need to. Denton came by in February and looked at the windbreak and said, grudgingly, that it wasn't a bad idea, which was the frontier equivalent of a standing ovation. The girls grew. This is the central fact of the years that followed, the fact around which everything else organized itself. Eleanor and May grew with the particular commitment of children who have decided that growing is a project worth taking seriously. They gained weight and length, and then, gradually, personality in the specific way that babies become people, not all at once, but in installments, each month revealing something new that had apparently been there all along, just waiting for the room to show itself. May got her first word in February, which was, as Clara had predicted to Vivian, a complaint. She'd been lying in the cradle watching the window while the wind rattled the glass, and she turned her head and looked at Silas across the room and said, clearly and without ambiguity, "No." Silas put down the harness he'd been mending. "No what?" May looked at the window, looked back at him. "The wind?" he said. "You want me to stop the wind?" She looked at the window again with an expression of maximum dissatisfaction. "I'll see what I can do." he said. He couldn't do anything about the wind. She registered her displeasure. He wrote the date and the word down in the small notebook Clara had bought for the purpose. And that evening, Clara wrote to Vivian and described the whole scene in exactly enough detail to make Vivian laugh, which Clara had learned was one of Vivian's more valuable qualities. She could be made to laugh if you found the right angle, and it changed her face entirely. Vivian wrote back within the week, as she always did. She had kept her word about the letters, thorough, regular, and frequently containing opinions about things no one had asked her opinion about, which was simply how Vivian operated and had stopped being startling by November. She'd been back once already, in December, for 2 weeks over Christmas, and she'd fit herself back into the household with the efficiency of someone who'd been paying close attention the first time and knew exactly where she went. She brought presents. She helped with the night feedings without being asked. She and Clara had a serious argument on the 4th day about the best way to handle Eleanor's teething discomfort, and came out the other side of it with a solution that was neither of their original positions but was better than both, and didn't mention the argument again. She told Eleanor and May, in a voice that was softer than the one she used for adults, about their father. Small things, that he'd been stubborn, that he'd had a good laugh, that he'd been kind to animals in the unconscious way of people who'd been around animals all their lives. She couldn't tell them about their mother yet, not really, not in words they could understand. But she told them her name. She said June in the same voice she said Thomas, with the weight of someone making sure the names stayed alive by speaking them. Clara was grateful for that. It was one of those things she didn't know how to do herself, being too close to what June had left behind, and she was glad there was someone who could. Spring came, and with it the territorial court date. Nathan had been building the case against Cutter Vane through the winter with his slow, methodical care, and by March it was ready. The court convened in the county seat 40 miles south, and Clara and Silas rode down on a Tuesday morning and sat in a room with 40 other people and listened to a judge work through it in the way courts worked through things. Slowly, repeatedly, with a great deal of language designed to make straightforward facts sound complicated. Silas gave his testimony on the second day. He sat in the chair at the front of the room and answered questions for 3 hours in the same measured voice he used for everything, and Clara sat in the third row and watched the faces of the people listening. She watched them understand, gradually, what had happened at the river crossing. She watched the room change as the hours went on. There was a woman 2 rows in front of her who kept her hands very still in her lap the entire time, which Clara recognized as what you did when something was hitting close enough that you didn't trust your hands. The man who'd talked in Nathan's custody testified too, and 2 others. The ledger Vane had kept went into evidence. June Calloway's letter, in its oilcloth wrapping, went into evidence. Cutter Vane sat at the front of the room and looked at various points in the middle distance and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. His lawyer said things, but they were the kind of things that got quieter and quieter as the evidence accumulated, until by the 3rd day they were barely audible. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. Claire and Silas were standing outside the courthouse when Nathan came out and told them. The sky was doing the enormous Nebraska spring thing, pale blue from edge to edge, the clouds moving fast and high, the air smelling like thawed earth and coming green. Nathan stood on the courthouse steps with his hat in his hands in his usual way and said the word guilty in his flat voice, and then said the sentence, which was what everyone had known it would be. "It's done," Nathan said. Silas nodded. His face was still. "Does it feel like anything?" Clara asked him, later, on the ride home. They were 20 miles out, the courthouse behind them, the ranch ahead, the road long and straight and empty on either side. He thought about it. She liked that about him. He thought before he answered, even questions that had easy answers, because he'd learned somewhere along the way that easy answers were often wrong. "It feels like something finished," he said. "Not fixed, but finished." She understood the distinction. Fixed would mean the river crossing hadn't happened. Finished just meant it had an endpoint, a line you could point to and say, "Here is where it stopped getting worse." That was not a small thing. That was not nothing. But it wasn't the same as fixed, and saying it was fixed would be a lie, and she'd never been interested in those. June's letter was read in court, Clara said. "I know, I heard it." "What did you think?" He was quiet for a moment. "I thought she'd have been annoyed that it took this long." He paused. "And I thought she'd have been satisfied with how it ended." Clara thought he was probably right about both things. But the adoption was finalized in April. Not a dramatic moment legally, just a document signed and witnessed and filed, Nathan's careful handwriting on the official form, a judge's signature at the bottom, and then it was real in the way that paper makes things real. Eleanor Calloway Boone. May Calloway Boone. On record. Permanent. Not something that could be taken back. Clara had expected to feel something large and definitive. She felt instead the same thing she'd felt on the day they married, like something that was already true had been given a word, like the paperwork was catching up to the fact rather than creating it. She told Nathan this while she was signing. He looked at her over his reading glasses. Most people find the paperwork satisfying. I find it correct, she said. That's different. He made the sound that was his laugh. Sign where indicated, Clara. She signed where indicated. The ride back from the county seat that day was the same road as the courthouse verdict. Long and straight, the spring grass coming up green on both sides now, real green, the kind that meant it had committed and wasn't going back. Silas drove the wagon. Clara sat beside him. In the back, Eleanor and May, 7 months old now, getting big enough to have opinions about being carried, were in the padded box Clara had lined with blankets for road travel, and they were both awake and conducting some kind of interaction with each other that seemed to involve a great deal of intense eye contact and reciprocal sounds. They're talking, Silas said. He'd been watching them in the small mirror propped at the back of the seat. They've been talking to each other since January. We just can't understand it. What do you think they're saying? May is complaining. Eleanor is listening patiently and then doing whatever she was going to do anyway. He made a sound. That's already their whole dynamic. Yes. Clara looked back at them over her shoulder. Eleanor had reached out and grabbed May's hand, which May permitted with the air of someone accepting a reasonable olive branch. It's going to be like that when they're 15, probably. And when they're 30. Probably when they're 50. She turned back to the road. The ranch was another 8 miles, the afternoon going long and warm and gold. I've been thinking about what they'll remember. Of what? Of any of this. The first year. They won't remember it. None of it. She paused. They won't remember the river crossing or any of what came before. They won't remember the basket in the kitchen or the night Vane's men came. They won't even remember the house the way it looks right now. She watched the grass go by. All of that will just be gone. Not happened for them. Silas was quiet for a moment. Does that bother you? She thought about it honestly. I thought it would, but no. She looked back at the girls one more time, Eleanor and May, holding hands in the traveling box, watching the sky go by overhead with the profound, interested attention of children for whom the world is still entirely new. What they'll know is what comes after, and what comes after is up to us. He nodded. He drove and was quiet in the way he was quiet when he was actually thinking, not just done talking. That's a lot of responsibility, he said. Yes, she said, it is. We'll get things wrong. We will. Probably regularly. Almost certainly. She looked at him. Does that concern you? He thought about it. No, I got myself here, didn't I? After a number of wrong turns. Several significant wrong turns, she agreed, and it led somewhere worth being. She looked at him for a moment, his profile against the afternoon sky. The man who had shown up at her gate on a dying horse with borrowed information and someone else's children, who had eaten at her kitchen table every morning for 7 months, and fixed her fence and winterized her barn, and held May still, and talked to her in the dark, and sat up all night with his back against the kitchen cabinet because she'd fallen asleep on the floor. Yes, she said. It did. What? The years passed the way years do on a working ranch. Not smoothly, never smoothly, but with the forward motion of things that have committed to continuing regardless of the difficulty. There were hard winters and one summer of drought that cost them 2 of the cattle and required some uncomfortable arithmetic about which repairs could wait and which couldn't. There was a year when Silas's shoulder, the old wound, the one from the river crossing that Clara had packed with cloth on the night he arrived, started giving him serious trouble, and he spent 3 months managing it and being short-tempered about the management in the way men are when their bodies are informing them they've been through something. There were good years, too. A calf season that went better than any they'd managed before. A harvest that came in under good weather and sold well. A summer when the grass stayed green deep into August, and the whole prairie had a quality of abundance that the territory didn't always offer, and you tried to remember exactly when it did. Eleanor and May grew through all of it. Eleanor at 3 was quiet and observant, and could sit on the fence watching the cattle work for an hour without moving, taking things in with the same scholarly attention she'd given her own hand at 4 months old. She was, Clara thought, a person who needed to understand things completely before she was willing to act on them, which was going to serve her well in some situations and drive her mad in others. She got her first question phase at 2.5. Why was her primary tool, and she used it without mercy, following every answer with another why, until she reached something that satisfied her, or Clara ran out of explanation, whichever came first. May at 3 was entirely different and entirely herself. She was loud in the specific way of people who have always had something to say and have always believed it worth saying. She fell down more than Eleanor because she moved faster than she could reliably control. She cried with genuine commitment and stopped crying with the same completeness. There was no trailing off with May, no residual sniffling. When she was done being upset, she was done, and she expected everyone else to be done too. She made friends with Denton's grandchildren, and then organized them, and then argued with them, and then reorganized them, and Denton reported this to Silas with something that was half complaint and half admiration. They were good children, which is to say they were difficult and funny and occasionally exhausting and entirely worth every bit of it. Vivian came twice a year, regular as weather, Christmas and summer, 2 weeks each time, and she fit into the household the way she'd fit in that first December. Not seamlessly, exactly, because Vivian didn't do anything seamlessly, and neither did the household, but functionally. She argued with Clara about things, and was sometimes right and sometimes wrong, and always willing to be told she was wrong eventually, which was all you could really ask. She told Eleanor and May about their father and mother in the incremental way you tell children things, a little at a time, in words they could hold, building toward the full picture slowly. She brought Thomas Calloway's Bible the summer the girls turned 4. It had come from the wreckage at the river crossing. Nathan had kept it as evidence and returned it to Clara after the trial. Clara had kept it in the drawer with the important papers and hadn't been sure what to do with it. When Vivian arrived that June and Clara showed her, she sat with it in her hands for a long time and then said she'd like to read from it with the girls, and she did. And what she read wasn't the religious parts but the genealogy pages at the back. The family names written there in Thomas's handwriting, going back 3 generations, all those people who'd lived and died and left their names in the back of a Bible to say we were here. She added Eleanor and May's names herself, wrote them carefully in the space below their parents' names, and dated it and handed the pen to Clara. "You should sign it too," she said. Clara looked at the page. All those names, the ones that had ended at the river crossing and the ones that hadn't. She signed it. She handed the pen to Silas, who signed it too without being asked for reasons, because he understood. It went back in the drawer with the important papers, where it belonged. The girls were 5 when Eleanor asked about it. They were in the yard, end of a summer afternoon, Silas mending a section of fence that had finally given up after 5 years of Silas fixing the parts that failed, while the rest of it waited its turn. Eleanor was sitting on the top rail watching him work in the way she had, still and attentive, letting him do the thing while she thought about something that she'd get to in her own time. "Papa," she said. Were we born here?" He set down the hammer, turned to look at her. She was looking back at him with her mother's eyes, Clara's eyes, the ones that had been watching and assessing things since she was 3 days old. "No," he said. "You were born farther east. Your first parents were traveling west. You were very small." She considered this. What happened to them? He'd known this conversation was coming. He and Clara had talked about it more than once. What to say? How much? At what age? The answer they'd arrived at was the truth, in the version appropriate to 5 years old, without dressing it up in language that would have to be undone later. "They died," he said, "before they could get where they were going. That happens sometimes on long journeys. It's not fair and it's not right, but it happens." She was quiet for a moment. "Were they good?" He looked at her. Thought about June Calloway's letter in its oilcloth wrapping. Thought about a woman who had hidden her daughters under a wagon floor and lain down on top of them because that was the only thing left she could do. Your mother was one of the bravest people I've ever known about, he said, and I didn't even know her. I only know what she did. What did she do? She made sure you were safe, he said, even when everything was very hard. She made sure you and May would be found. He picked up the hammer again. She wanted someone to be kind to you, and she was right that someone would be. Eleanor thought about this for what seemed like a long time, but was probably 30 seconds, which was a long time for a 5-year-old. Mama was the someone, she said. And me, he said, and Aunt Vivian. Aunt Vivian, too. She nodded slowly with the air of someone filing information correctly. Okay, she said. He went back to the fence. Papa, she said again, after a minute. I'm glad you found us. He set the hammer down for the second time. He looked at Eleanor on the fence rail, 5 years old, sun-browned, her dark hair in 2 braids that had been tidy at breakfast and were considerably less tidy now. He looked at this child who had hidden under a wagon floor at 3 months old and had no memory of it, who had come through something enormous and unasked for and had arrived here, on this fence rail, on this Tuesday afternoon, asking good questions and filing the answers carefully. Me too, he said. It was not a sufficient thing to say. There was no sufficient thing to say, but she seemed to understand it and went back to watching him work, and that was enough. He told Clara that evening. They were on the porch in the usual positions, the girls asleep inside, the summer dark coming in slowly from the east. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. What did May ask? She said. May didn't ask anything. She was busy building something in the dirt and got into an argument with a beetle. Clara made a sound. That's May. That's May, he agreed. They sat with it for a while. The prairie was doing its night thing, the stars coming out, the grass going quiet, the particular vast silence that wasn't really silence at all if you knew how to listen in it. Crickets. A coyote somewhere west. The horse shifting in the barn. June would have been glad, Clara said, to know where they ended up. Yeah, he said. I think so. You gave her that. You carrying them 34 miles. She looked at him sideways. You know that. He looked out at the dark. He'd been carrying that particular weight for almost 5 years now. The weight of what he hadn't been able to do at the river crossing alongside the weight of what he had. He'd never set it down entirely. She knew that. He knew she knew. It wasn't the kind of thing you set down entirely, but it was lighter than it had been. That was true. I've been thinking about something, he said. Tell me. I want to do something with that piece of land on the north quarter, the flat section that doesn't do much for grazing. He paused. Build a second house, eventually. For hired hands, or I don't know. Just to have. He stopped. Or to have for the girls when they're grown, if they want to stay. She looked at him. You're planning for them grown. I'm planning for the possibility. He turned his head. Is that strange? No. She thought about it. It's what people do when they decide somewhere is real. They start thinking about it in time. She looked at the dark yard. When I first came here, I thought about leaving constantly. Every hard winter, every drought year. I thought about it. What kept you? The land, she said. Eventually. The way it looks in the evening in summer when the grass goes gold. The way the sky is in the morning before anything else is awake. She paused. And then it was the girls. And you. She looked at him. And then it was just mine. The way things get when you've been in them long enough that the line between you and the thing disappears. He nodded. Plant something on that north quarter, she said. If you want to build something, build it. We'll figure out what it's for. He nodded again. Looked back out at the dark. The night was very quiet. Inside the house, someone, Eleanor, from the sound of it, shifted in the new bed they'd moved the girls into 6 months ago when the cradle had finally become truly inadequate. The bed that Silas had built from proper timber over 3 weeks in the spring, the one that would hold them for years yet. The sound settled. The prairie went on being enormous around the small lit house, around the woman on the porch and the man beside her, around the two children sleeping inside, who had come into the world during a violent passage and had come out the other side into this particular life, this specific yard, this Tuesday evening in Nebraska with crickets and a coyote and the smell of summer grass going slowly gold at the end of its season. Clara thought about what Eleanor had said to Silas at the fence. "I'm glad you found us." She thought about the morning she'd seen a shape moving wrong on the western horizon. A horse going too slow, a man folded over the saddle, and had walked toward the fence not because she'd known what it was, but because looking away wasn't something she was built for. She thought about the weight of two infants in her arms, terrifyingly light, and a man bleeding in the dirt who had tied his arms shut around them so he wouldn't let go. She thought about all the ways it could have gone differently, all the moments where the thread had been thin. A different road, a different ranch, a horse that gave out 20 miles sooner. It was easy to see those other versions, the ones where none of this happened, and the ease of seeing them made what had actually happened feel both more fragile and more valuable. The world had sent her a man and two children. The world had sent them a woman with a porch and a laundry basket and enough stubbornness to keep going through the hard parts. None of them had been looking for what they found. None of them had known to look. That was how it worked, she thought. You didn't find the important things by searching for them with the right shape already in mind. You found them by being in the right place when they arrived, by not looking away, by deciding that whatever came off the prairie at the end of a hard day was worth walking toward. It was not a comfortable way to live. It was not simple. It demanded things that comfortable lives didn't demand, and it cost things that simpler lives didn't cost. But here was the porch. Here was the evening. Here was the man she'd not expected and had stopped trying to imagine her life without. Here were the girls, asleep, growing in the dark the way children grew. Not visibly, not dramatically, but real, turning incrementally into the people they were going to be, carrying the names of people who had loved them and died and wanted for them nothing grander than kindness. Clara breathed the summer air in and out. The stars were very bright. The grass was very quiet. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything that had been built, slowly and imperfectly and without a plan, from the ruins of what had been lost. And it was standing, and it was real, and it was going to last.